quick introductions. Do you want to say a couple of words about yourself? You will be on live unlike the others, but obviously you're the most important person. So just tell us who you are, where you are, so we know who's here.
Hi, my name is Fabian. I am from America originally. I'm currently in Canada, and I am at present a PhD student, and I guess that's basically me.
You're at U of T, University of Toronto, right?
Yeah, University of Toronto, yeah.
And you will be attending the symposium in Miami, right? We gave the travel.
Yes, already.
All right, well, let me say a few words as an introduction in case you don't know much about the type of data we have and the type of research we can do. And then, as discussed earlier, we will go on with you and your ideas for the papers that you may have, and then maybe provide some initial feedback, and then maybe discuss how we all can proceed together with that. So maybe with the exception of Fabian, and being a PhD student, I kind of suspect he has a lot of training in statistics, but most either regular students or even some professors may not have specialized training in statistics and research methods. So they may not know what, I don't know, logistic regression is and how to deal with those numbers. And so that makes it difficult for them to do the conventional type of research using Expulsion data. But the good news is that we have all kinds of data, and some of them can be used for research, for producing high quality, good research knowledge publications, even if you have limited skills specifically with numbers and still want to do research. Before I get into the technicalities, why would you want to do research? I mean, I suppose since you're here, you probably already have that question answered, and you probably decided that it's worthwhile. Otherwise, you wouldn't join this webinar, but just to be sure. So reason number one would be if you ever want to do a graduate degree, if you want to go especially to the PhD program somewhere, having a publication or even having some research that you did, even if it's not published, it is a huge differentiating factor. It will increase your chances of being admitted and getting a stipend probably at least 2 times, maybe even several times. The reason for that is that especially PhD programs, but also master's programs to some extent, they prepare basically researchers. And when the admissions committee will be reviewing the documents, the only question really they want to answer is whether or not this applicant has a chance of becoming a researcher one day. And so there is no better way to prove that you can be a good researcher than by actually having some research on your resume. So if you do it, you will dramatically improve your chances of getting admitted to a good program, because most of the applicants will not have any completed research at the time of the application. The same applies for some of the jobs that may require research and development skills. Again, if you're applying to be, I don't know, maybe just regular sales representative or something like that, maybe it doesn't matter that much. But if the job requires some sort of analytic skills, some sort of analysis of information, maybe texts, if you have published research, it will differentiate you from all the other applicants, and you will have a much, much better chance of being accepted to those kind of higher level, more intellectual jobs. At least I know if I were the employer and I had someone with research publications on their resume, even if you published on a topic that is not directly related to my field, that will still tell me that this person can work with information, can probably go through tons of literature and documents, can find interesting trends and relationships in them, and then can describe them in a way that others can read. And so even if the topic is not exactly what I need for this job, those are still the skills that I probably will need. And so if you have that record, that will help a lot. And then finally, and that's something to what Claudia said, if you want to travel, having a good paper submitted to a conference in many cases will get you the money that you need to go to a conference. In the academic world, if you're a student, PhD, undergraduate, master's, doesn't matter. If you have a paper accepted for presentation at a good conference, it is almost guaranteed your school will give you the money to attend the conference. Especially at the research schools, like for example, where Fabian is at the University of Toronto, here at the University of North Carolina, as long as I'm presenting the paper, there is money set aside specifically for these purposes. And so your department maybe, or maybe you have an on-campus student travel fund or professor travel fund, they will give you the money to go to the conference. And so if you have a good paper and there is a conference in an interesting place and you have a paper accepted for presentation, usually that will allow you to get the funding to go to that place. At the very least, you will have some money to travel. You will see new places, meet new people. So it seems like a good way to travel. And then on top of that, obviously, you will talk about your research. You will probably get some feedback. You will probably find people who are also interested in this topic, maybe make colleagues. You never know what that may lead to. So definitely worthwhile to invest time in this. Now, when it comes to the Expulsion data, again, if you have specialized training in statistics, you can use any of the 2,000 variables we have, and you would know what to do with them. You would know how to run from simple correlations all the way to regressions, and then maybe some sort of structural equation modeling and hierarchical linear modeling and whatever other methods you use. But if you are not necessarily very strong in statistics, just have some basic knowledge of mathematics and nothing else, you can still do good quality research. And in this case, probably the data you want to use are not so much the numeric data we have, but what we call the qualitative data. You all have gone through Expulsion, and you know that at the end of each week, and then at the end of the project, we have all those surveys. And so one of the questions, usually the last one, is in your own words, tell us about your experiences. And students, some of them don't answer those questions. Most would write a few words, like a couple sentences. And some would even write pages and pages of text. And they would describe, this is what happened, and I had a conflict of this kind, and maybe, somebody's bullying me, or maybe everything's going fine. And they would describe all kinds of situations. And so those data could be used for several types of research. One, case studies. So a case study, very popular especially in psychiatry, in like medical science. You just literally take one case and you describe it in depth. For example, as a coach, or maybe as a person who just simply reads the comments from the students, you've encountered an interesting situation. Somebody had a conflict, or maybe somebody had a case of sexual harassment, or maybe bullying, or maybe, I don't know, maybe people fell in love and, I don't know, decided to get married, or whatever else could have happened. So as long as it's an interesting case, or maybe a very typical case, you can simply take that one instance, those couple, or maybe several people, or one team, and describe it. This is what happened. This is how they responded. This is what happened as a result of that response. The problem was solved, or maybe not solved. And then based on your knowledge of that specific case, you can even have some sort of a conclusion in the end, and maybe even a recommendation. If you see a case like this is what needs to be done, because this is what these guys did, and it helped them or didn't help them, or hurt the situation. And so maybe, based on this knowledge, I would recommend that you do this and this next time. In fact, if you have an interesting case study, it may even be a good idea to collect some additional data. Like, let's say it's a situation in a particular team. You can literally reach out to those team members, and I'll be happy to give the contacts for you, or reach out to them on your behalf, and then if they respond, put you in touch with them. And you can even interview them. Tell me more what happened. So I read your comments. It seems like you had this interesting situation. There was either, I don't know, some sort of a leadership crisis, or maybe there was a case of cheating or bullying, or as I said, maybe everything was so good that you guys fell in love and decided to have a meeting, face-to-face after the project. Could you tell us more? Tell us what exactly happened, how it all began, who was the one who started the whole thing, how did you respond, do you wish you did something differently? If you did something differently, what do you think would have happened? So after you ask those questions, even if it's, as I said, only a few people, you already have some information that would be of interest to managers, to team members, to researchers, because you tell basically a story. I mean, people love stories, and in many cases, those stories could be educational. So that already could be a paper. Another approach, kind of more sophisticated approach, would be to take those qualitative data, code them, kind of convert them to numeric data, and then run some simple analyses. And I can show you very quickly, I will share my screens just in a second. We'll show you very quickly an example of a study that we did of this kind with my colleagues. Just one second. I should have had that opened earlier. Free writing. All right, so let me share the screen. So there was one paper that we now completed and ready for submission, not published yet, that looked at free writing or lack of participation in teams. And what we did for this particular paper, we went, after the project was over, we went and contacted the people who were excluded from their teams for the lack of their participation. You can see my screen, right? Yeah. So, and we had all those, we call it interview data, but in reality, it was basically a survey. So in reality, it was about 10 questions like these. Let me read the questions that we asked. So there would be a question like, for example, your team says you were not investing enough time into the project, that you did not work very hard and your contribution was too small. Is it true? And so some of them would say, yes, it is true. Others would say, not, it is not true. And some would actually write quite a lot of, like a detailed description. And then there would be another question, for example, let me see. Can you please describe in your own words at which point you did start having problems with your team? And again, some people would say a few words. Some would write about about a paragraph of text, and then just say, everything was fine initially, but then we started running into some problems and stuff like that. And some actually write a lot and a lot of text. And so we had a question after question, so about, 10 of them or so. And so what we did with these data, we then coded them for a number of kind of criteria or a number of characteristics. So each of the responses was coded for the tone of the response, like was it a positive, negative, or neutral? In fact, I have a coding scheme here. Let me see if I can find it right away. Yeah. Oops. Just a second. Yeah, right here. So each of the comments was coded as positive, negative, or neutral. Then it was coded whether it was about people or about circumstances or about the task. If the people talked about whether or not they actually participated, we coded that as admitting the fault and saying, yes, I did not participate. Then, yes, I did not participate, but this is the reason. For example, people didn't like me, or due to circumstances, or denying the responsibility and saying, no, I participated, they're lying. Then timing of the problem, so if they talk when the whole thing started, we coded, right before, the project started, right after the project started, early on in the project, in the middle, and then towards the end. Then when they were asked, why would you, or when they talked about why they didn't participate, there were apparently 18 common reasons, and so on and so on and so on. So there were about 10 dimensions along which we coded the data. And so here, when you look at this, scheme here, we can have some percentages. Like, for example, to question 1, 55% of the comments were positive, 11 were negative, 34 were neutral. And when we talk about the context, 62% of the people talked about people, or team members, 31 talked about circumstances, and only 7% talked about the task. When asked whose fault it was, 57% said that it was due to circumstances, 31 said that it was due to the people on the team, and 11 said it was just my fault and didn't say why. And so on and so on. So it's a very simple mathematics, essentially, but it gives us some numbers that we can now use to analyze the situation. And so once you have those simple frequencies, all of a sudden you can write some, provide some percentages. You can have some simple frequency counts. You can have some simple graphs, and you can describe what happened. So the same thing can happen, for example, in the general weekly comments. You can simply code them for are they positive or negative, and see, how many people share comments when they're positive, how many people share comments when they're negative, and maybe what percent of the people don't even respond. And so the results probably will be something like this. It would be about a third of the people will not say anything, and then those who comment, usually they're positive, and maybe 10% are negative. But then you can take a quick look and talk about, the length of the comment and say, oh, actually, when people are happy, they only say 3 words. In most cases, when everything goes fine, people would just say everything is fine. But then when there is a problem, that's when people provide more information. You can say, okay, one trend I noticed is that when there is a problem, people tend to say much more than when there is no problem. Nobody will spend pages of text on describing how wonderful things are. But when the problem occurs, that's when people go to the extra mile and provide additional comments. And then again, you can look at what they talk about, for example, in terms of what kind of challenges they encounter. Is it people not being able to coordinate their efforts? Is it maybe some conflicts that they have? Is it maybe some bullying? Maybe something else? Since we do it every single week, an interesting study would be to look at the themes in the comments from week 1 to after the project. So do people talk about the same things in the beginning as they talk in the middle, as they talk in the end of the project? Maybe in the beginning, it would be what we call like the honeymoon. Everybody's happy and all the comments are about everything's fine. And maybe towards the middle, people go through this phase that we call disenchantment. So all of a sudden they realize that working with people from around the world is much more challenging. And so now they're not talking happily about how wonderful it is to work with people from new cultures, but maybe they start talking about differences in time zones, inability to schedule a meeting, and whatever else they're going through. And maybe towards the end, they talk about something yet different, and who knows. And so if you wanted to, for example, analyze the types of concerns people have at different stages of the project, it would be very easy to do. Like you literally just code for the topics, the responses in week 1, 2, 3, and 4, and so on and so on. But once you have read those comments, I bet you will see some interesting trends. I bet you will see that the perception change over time. The tone of the message changes over time. The concerns people have, the challenges they face are different, and that would be a very interesting study. So you can share in this presentation, in this paper, that in the beginning this is what people deal with, and then towards the middle, actually their focus changes or shifts to this, and then in the end, that turns out that this is the concern. And so if you ever have to participate in a global virtual team, you better know that at the end, you will have to deal with these problems. So maybe you should focus on them earlier on, because my research shows that towards the end, that's what everybody talks about, and things like that. And so even the lowest tech approach would be, simply read those comments and see what people talk about. I bet even without any fancy coding, without any special theory, you will probably see some interesting trends, and you will probably notice things that you will find interesting and that will be worthwhile sharing with everybody else, or readers or members of global virtual teams. So very simple stuff. Obviously, if you want to publish the paper in a like #1 journal, you will have to provide some theoretical explanation. You may have to provide some more detailed analysis. You may have to provide quotes of the representative comments and stuff like that. But as long as you want to just publish the paper in a good journal, not necessarily an elite one, or maybe present at a conference, usually as long as you notice something interesting, that is more or less enough. And I can give you examples of the papers we already have published on Teams, on free writing, on global virtual teams. You can use the review of the literature from our paper, maybe updated obviously, but you can use some of that stuff, so you don't have to do it from scratch. You can maybe see some relevant theories and see they apply to the things that you see. And so it shouldn't be too much work to prepare something like that, and see what happens. And then depending on the feedback, you can further advance it or try to publish it in that format, and so on and so on. Final comment before we get to you. Most conferences, the Academy of International Business, Academy of Management, Southern Management Association, they have or accept applications for presentations in different formats. They would have what they call a competitive paper, and that's where you have to submit a fully finished paper, usually about 40 pages, 10,000 words. And those papers will have all the parts to it, so you will have the introduction, you will have the method, you will have the analysis, you will have the conclusions, fully finished paper. But they also have what they call an interactive paper format, and then they also have a panel format. And so interactive papers usually are less developed papers. Usually it's more of a maybe idea with some preliminary results. The format of that session is that you will say, I had this idea, I had these data, I looked at the data, it seems like the data are supporting my idea, or I read the papers or comments and they gave me these ideas. I have something, it's not a finished paper yet, but I have something, I think it would be an interesting message. And so instead of presenting the findings, you kind of more present your method, your initial results, and you say or ask the audience or other people in the session, would you guys recommend me what else I can do with this paper? So do you think it's promising? Do you think you can take it somewhere? So this is something you can definitely do. And then the third format would be a panel session, or sometimes it's called symposium, though it's very similar in the format. And the way those go is it's more of a discussion of ideas rather than papers per se. So the topic can be anything, and it doesn't have to be a test of hypotheses or some sort of like regression or analysis. It could be simply a topic. Like you can, for example, propose a session on, I don't know, conflicts in global virtual teams. And your presentation will not be about, okay, I did the analysis and this is what I found. It will be more, this is why it's important. I read some comments and it seems like conflicts happen all the time. So let's have like a roundtable discussion about what we can do with this, how big a problem it is, what kind of research can address it, what can be done about it. You can still present your preliminary findings and you can say, well, I read so many comments, and while I do not have conclusive findings or recommendations, based on what I read so far, it seems like this is what I'm finding. And so again, for the panel submission and for the interactive paper, usually you just have a few pages that summarize your ideas. Again, it depends on the conference. Sometimes the requirements are a little different, but in most cases, it's more about the idea. And then the competitive paper, it's a full-length paper. So full-length paper would be a little bit more difficult to develop, especially if you wanted to submit it to the Academy of International Business Southeast. The deadline is June 15th. It is very likely they will extend it a little bit. They always extend it by a couple of weeks. But normally we can say now that we have about a month before the deadline. So it would be hard to write a high quality, fully finished paper if you haven't started yet. But an interactive paper, definitely doable. Panel session, definitely doable. So you can be the lead author, you can maybe invite some more people. You can definitely still complete it in time and then go to the conference. I will be chairing the research methods track of the Academy of International Business Southeast, which this year will be in October in Washington, D.C. So if your paper deals with the research methods, like if you talk about, like ways to analyze interviews, for example, or something like that, I will definitely take a much closer look at your submission. You will not get a favorable treatment, but we will definitely take a close look at your submission to make sure that nothing's overlooked. And as long as there is something interesting there is a good chance the paper will be accepted. So this is a very quick overview. Now I'd like to hear from you what kind of papers or studies you have in mind. Or if you already maybe started working with some of those data, what are you finding so far? Anyone? Fabian is smiling. Do you want to say something? And Henrik just joined in. So Henrik, if you have any comments or ideas or papers that you have in mind already, let me know too. So anyone, don't be shy. I know at least some of you have already started working on it, so go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I haven't actually started working on the papers yet. However, from looking at the conflict and the analysis of the data that I've had the opportunity to peruse, I realized that some persons have been making some negative comments in regards to like Expulsion is the worst program they've ever encountered, but they don't go into details to why. Like, I hate this program and stuff like that. So interesting topic that I think would be to peruse is why persons have such negative outlook on the Expulsion, because, well, they have a negative outlook. They did not actually went into detail to explain the reason behind this negative outlook. Could be because difficulties working with team members, could be because of time zone conflict, it could be because of personal issues and they're being forced to do this course rather than wanted to fully participate. There could be a number of reasons why these had their negative outlooks, but they were not fully explained into details. So I think that it would be interesting to pursue a paper as it relates to the reasons why person having these negative outlooks on the Expulsion program. And you can give your feedback.
Yes, this is actually an excellent idea. And there are two reasons for why it is an excellent idea. One, at the end of the project, we ask students to evaluate the quality of the project itself. So not about the team, not about the paper they wrote, but do you think the project Expulsion was a valuable addition to your course? And usually the distribution of the responses is such that probably about 85% choose extremely helpful. then probably another 10% choose helpful to some extent. Then there are like, I don't know, 2% who will say, yeah, it's okay. But then there are always 3% or so at the bottom of the distribution who say, I hated it. It was the worst, worst experience ever. And so for us, it would be very interesting to know why they hated it. Was it, again, as you said, maybe because they were forced to participate in it, maybe they got a bad team, or whatever the other reasons. So it would be something that we can use as project organizers or anyone else who does experiential learning projects to inform us as to what can tick off people, like what could not work. And so if you were able to identify those specific factors that led to their dissatisfaction, it would be a very valuable contribution to educators or people who read educational literature, because they can learn from that and do the projects better. But even more or even better reason to write this paper would be that at this time, everybody loves experiential learning. It's a big hype. Everybody loves this approach. It's kind of new trend in management education. Everybody believes that it should be hands-on. It should be real live practical experience. And so, yes, it is a good idea. It probably works in most of the cases, but turns out that it doesn't work for everyone. Just like you said, some people make negative comments. And so even if you don't say what needs to be done to eliminate that group of people who are not happy, to reduce maybe that number of people who are not happy, you can simply talk about that, maybe it's not for everyone. So I looked at the data, certain percentage of the people didn't like it. This is why they didn't like it. And I don't know, maybe for some people it's better just to read the book, or maybe, listen to the lecture instead of actually putting them in a situation where they have to do something practical. And again, I suppose it would be a little bit counter, against the mainstream, perception that experiential learning is good. And experiential projects always help and should be used more extensively in management education. And you say here, maybe not for everyone. But it is valuable, because maybe it is not for everyone. Maybe there is, 3-5% of the population that just don't like it. Maybe they just want to, watch a documentary or read a book, and that's all they need. And so if you were able to intelligently talk about that and say, okay, I identified this is the percentage of people who didn't like it, this is why, that would be a valuable contribution. And in fact, I can even give you the list of people, so we can just look at the latest survey and look at that one question where people say how valuable that project or experience was for them. And we can just, literally select the bottom 5% or whatever, who said I absolutely hated it. And then maybe you want to reach out to them and interview them and see why they say that. So maybe they just, because, maybe there is nothing wrong with the project, maybe just they just didn't like the course, or maybe they didn't like the professor. But at the same time, maybe there was something about the project that was not suitable for them. And maybe you can even identify a way to identify those people early on, so that maybe the professor can give them other projects before they even go through this miserable experience. So it definitely will be a very valuable contribution. It probably will go in a journal that deals with education rather than management. So it would be like Journal of Higher Education or Journal of Management Education. When you submit it to a conference, it probably would have to be submitted to what they call teaching and learning track. Again, usually they would have one on kind of pedagogy of international business. And I think that will be a very, very likely candidate for acceptance for presentation and then later for publication. Anyone else? Who else has some ideas and maybe wants to share with us? Henrik, Mateus, Claudia?
I think you already know we're trying to work in a paper.
Yes.
Our topic
about that, because I know that you guys are working on the paper, you and Tim and whoever else is in your team, but yeah. I don't know exactly what the topic is, so I still don't have much information about it.
Well, our topic is the correlation between group interaction, the positive and negative interactions, and the time within the global virtual team. So we want to know if it's better, their relation towards the end of the project or towards the start of the project. So we are analyzing all their comments week by week.
Yeah, that's exactly, that's a very, very good idea. In fact, I will even tell you that it's possible you will have several papers coming out of it, because in most cases, you don't want to put too much information in one paper. So as my supervisor used to say, kind of jokingly, that every paper should have at most one idea. And obviously he was kind of exaggerating, but yes, if you see one particular trend, you just isolate that, and that's one paper. If you see something else, it can be another paper. Once you start reading those comments week by week, I bet you will have many more observations than I needed for one paper.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
So have you analyzed the data yet? Have you coded them, or what's your approach? How are you doing it?
No, yeah, we're deciding how to code the data because we have a lot of comments. So we are deciding how to organize it.
Okay.
And then we are going to do what you're saying, that just like focus on one trend.
One question though, are you planning to go through the data from only one semester, or you're going through multiple semesters? Because as you said, it is a lot of comments. Even if you only take 2017, that's, you know, like several thousand people commenting every single week. And even if not everyone says something, it's still like probably hundreds of pages every single week. So just reading those comments will take you, I don't know, several weeks of doing nothing but reading them. So did you decide to read all of them, or did you decide to maybe like select a particular subgroup, just random collection of teams and see what happens? Have you made
I think we are going to choose just to select the data we have now. That is, I think, the last semester. So we're going to analyze that one because it's a lot of information if we go every single semester.
It may not be a good idea to do that. Yeah, it's better to select maybe one semester, or maybe even just say, you know what, we're going to read comments only from teams 1 through 100 because it's too much.
Okay.
Yeah. Another thing that I would recommend that you do, since you will be reading so much stuff, it's a very good idea to copy and record quotes that you think you may need to use later on. Like if you have a comment that is either very representative of a particular issue or maybe very unique in some respects, there is a very good chance you will actually need to quote that comment in your paper. Because when you do this sort of research, you not only say this is what we found, you usually say, okay, this is what we found, and here is a typical comment that, you know, discusses this issue. And it's going to be much more difficult to go back and try to find those good quotes than to actually, you know, create a collection of them as you read them for the first time, even though you will have many more quotes than you will actually use in the paper. But when you have that smaller selection, you can always go back and quickly find what you need, as opposed to having to go through all the, you know, all the many comments again and trying to find one out of thousands that you can use in the paper. Okay,
you're right. Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else? Henrik, Mateus, are you guys planning some papers? Any ideas that you want to share with us? Henrik comes on and off, so I'm not sure if it's...
Yeah, we have a thunderstorm here.
Yes.
So maybe that's the reason why my internet connection is really bad. I literally have no idea what to write about, but I'm open for ideas connected with entrepreneurship, and like I wrote my thesis about like why do entrepreneurship, or how is the decision-making process of going international in startups, and maybe there's a chance to dive a little bit deeper into this process, or like to write something about like
So it sounds to me that you are more interested in the business side of the project rather than the team side. And that is, again, a very viable idea, so can potentially lead to a paper. You can maybe talk more about what people put in the report. So if you read the reports, for example, or maybe if you read the comments where people talk not about interactions within the team, but the challenges they have with the task itself, maybe that can lead to some papers where, you know, when people are trying to develop a market expansion strategy for an international company, these are the challenges. So maybe this is what they find easily, but this is what they seem to struggle with. And again, that could be a very valuable paper. It will probably go in a journal that specializes in what we call business consulting. Usually there would be a track at every conference that specifically deals with consulting. And you can talk about, you know, challenges maybe and best practices of either developing a project for a client, or maybe specifically when the topic is, or the task is, to develop a market expansion strategy. So the things that consultants struggle with. or maybe even student consultants. I mean, it doesn't have to be about consultants in general, maybe even specifically when you hire students to do work. This is what they excel at. Like maybe they're very good at recommending new product features, or maybe they're very good at describing a particular market. But at the same time, maybe they're having difficulties with identifying the best market entry mode, or maybe identifying the best, I don't know, logistics, decisions and stuff like that. Again, could be very useful, especially for the companies who might be considering hiring either consultants in general or student consultants in particular, and they're not sure if it's going to work, and if it's going to work, what specific tasks they should assign to students. So as I said, my experience with that is that students or big crowds are very good at recommending best prices. Each individually may not know what the best price is, but once you get 100 recommendations, the average probably will be a very useful number. They are also very good at finding potential partners and distributors and stuff like that. Again, for a company, it will take a long time, to look around the world and find potential partners. But by the virtue of having this big crowd of consultants who are all around the world, and everybody, looks for some sort of a, distributor, retailer, partner for this client. Again, each of these individual links or leads may not be very useful. But once you have the reports from 100 teams and put them together, all of a sudden, an interesting picture emerges. And it's something that would have taken you months and months to do on your own. And here the crowd did it in a few weeks for you. So maybe it would be something like this. So again, a paper that deals more with the business side, the consulting side, the problem solving side, and not so much about the psychology of teams. So
sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
And I can try out with the analysis I'm doing now for the teams, maybe. Like for the reports.
Yeah. One thing I will also say, and then maybe we'll ask if anyone else has any suggestions, if Ron or Mateusz wants to share with us. But once you have some idea, and some ideas already, so we have team dynamics, we have business side, we have conflicts, we have all kinds of things already on the table. It may be difficult for you to do it alone. One thing is that we have so many projects, so many teams, and so it may be just too difficult to do it because it's just too much reading. And so for one person, it may be just simply, a matter of time, not enough time to process everything. So it may be a good idea to team up with other students, or because you don't have much experience with this yet, it may be a good idea to team up with other professors. And so what I can offer you is, if you are interested, if you have some ideas and you're interested in inviting more people as co-authors to your team, I can definitely circulate your call for co-authors either among other students. Obviously you have contacts of other coaches, but we also have many graduate students in the project. And so many of them might be interested in joining you. You can say, well, this is the idea I have. I will be using these data. I need help with coding the data, reading the comments, and maybe have some ideas as to how this all can be presented. But I can also circulate your call for co-authors among the instructors. And so, as you know, we have about 500 professors who have gone through Expulsion, and of those, about 200 are closely involved. Some participated once and then never teach the same course again. Some retired. But then we have at least 200 people who are very actively participate on almost every single semester, do a lot of research. And again, if a talented student came along and said, okay, I have this idea, I'm willing to do most of the work, but I need some additional help from a more experienced colleague, something's telling me there will be a number of people who will respond to your call. And so we don't have much time before the Academy of International Business Conference. It's only, as I said, about a month of time. But again, still possible somebody will respond and you can still work together. But looking more long-term, again, it may be a good idea to find a co-author. You will probably move a little slower because you have to communicate with that person. But at the same time, the work may be done faster, especially there's a massive amount of information you have to process. And as I said, two heads are better than one, especially if one of them is more experienced. So if you ever wanted to do that, let me know. I'm not sure if I personally will be able to join. More likely than not, I will not have the time to take on yet another project, yet another paper. But almost likely, almost certain I will be able to find somebody who will want to work with you. Oh, I just noticed Mateusz is writing comments here, so I didn't see that. Yeah, so Mateusz talks here about potentially a paper that looks at success criteria, trends that make a winning team. And so that's a very, very good idea. Numerically, many studies, many researchers, including ourselves, we've been trying to explain that in a number of ways by looking at all kinds of things going on in teams based on the numbers we have about the teams, like team diversity, team size, level of studies, things like that. What you can do, again, you can do all of those, obviously, too. But one thing you can do is you can, and I can give you the numbers, we can rank all the teams in terms of the quality of the report they produced, like literally the best teams, medium teams, lowest teams. And you can maybe look at the comments provided by the members of the winning teams versus the comments provided by the members of the teams who maybe didn't even submit a report. In fact, if you look at the 2017 data, we have about 10 teams out of 800 that didn't submit, or out of 900, I guess, if you take both tracks. So out of 900 teams or so, we have about 10 teams that didn't even submit a report. We have probably another 20, 30 teams that submitted very, very bad reports. Like most of the stuff is just copied and pasted, nothing useful, like completely useless reports. And then we have 10 finalists from the early track, and we'll have 10 finalists from the late track literally today, announced today. And maybe you can take those top 20, like elite teams, like the ones that did the best job, and maybe bottom 20 teams that completely failed, and see if there is any difference in how they talk about things. They all left comments. They all are roughly the same in terms of the size. And who knows, maybe they did have a different focus. Maybe they did have different challenges. I will not be surprised that you will find some very interesting differences just simply, analyzing those extreme cases. And if you have more time, maybe you can take, top 100 and bottom 100, and maybe even take some from the middle and see, if there is any systemic variation. So that can be a very, very interesting study. In fact, I believe that may be the best one from the ones I've heard so far. So, but even those of you who will look at conflicts and the business side, again, you can take those extreme cases. You can take some reports that are better, some that are worse, and see, what the differences are, how the teams are different. So all of those definitely, viable methods in any type of research question. Yeah, and then also Mateusz talks about startups here, and yeah, so again, a very interesting idea. So maybe you can take teams that chose more established companies, like for example, we have Forcier that has been around for many years. We have Sakona, a bigger company. From the previous semesters, we had some companies that have been around for decades. Like for example, Polaris participated last year, so it's a huge company, probably has been around for like 50 years now. And so you might want to look first what teams choose bigger, more established companies versus what teams choose startups, like for example, Unplag or Odyssey. And then once they start working on those different types of challenges, are they dealing with the same challenges? Are they, having different experiences? I have no idea what you will discover there, but I bet if you analyze those comments from those types of teams, you will probably find some interesting systemic variations. And then obviously you will be able to explain what's going on, provide recommendations both for clients, but also for the teams, things like that. All right, any other comments, questions? You all are on a very good track. In fact, I would say if you put something on paper and you have something like for interactive paper, maybe 10, 15 pages with some explanation of the problem. So you start with, we have global virtual teams and they sometimes have problems. Or people hire consultants or companies hire consultants and expect certain results. Or some teams perform well, some teams perform poorly, and we don't know why. And then you say, and I'm here to try to answer that question. And to answer that question, I used data from the Expulsion project. And I had so many teams, and they provided so many comments or whatever other data you use. And so this is how I analyzed those comments. So I coded them, or maybe I did some frequency count, or maybe I just simply read them. And this is what I found. And then you describe in a couple of pages what you found, that what your message is, and maybe add a few words based on these results, based on my findings. This is what I would recommend to managers of global virtual teams, or this is what I would recommend to the members of the teams, or for companies that are seeking to hire those teams to solve their problems. So as long as you can put something like that together, as I said, maybe even only like 10 pages, 15 pages, not a full-length paper, I pretty much guarantee you that as long as it's written, like no errors, properly formatted, more likely than not, it will be accepted to a good conference. Academy of Management is extremely selective, so it would be harder to get into that one. But Academy of International Business Southeast, for example, in Washington, D.C., or other prestigious but not necessarily super selective conferences, chances are you will have a very good chance of getting the paper accepted for presentation or for interactive session or for panel. And yeah, and I guess that can be the first step of a long journey that will lead to a successful career as a researcher, academic, or maybe, in industry, who knows. All right, let's stop here. If you have any other questions, now is a good time to ask. If you don't and have them later, feel free to email me. And as I said, if you would like to invite somebody as a co-author to your paper, especially if you want to invite instructors, let me know. I'll be happy to circulate your call for co-authors. And as I said, I bet there will be at least a couple of people who will positively respond to your call, and hopefully their presence on your co-author team will help you produce a better product. All right. Okay, well, I'm out then.